We are preparing for our next speaker. Yesterday, I introduced him, and I only had time to make a brief comment about how much I loved his last name, and found out that he is not, in fact, related to the economist, Friedrich Hayek, who is my all-time favorite. However, he has what I would argue is an equally distinguished career, having worked as an investment banker for many years with groups like Citigroup and Salomon Brothers, and done some really amazing work in helping out countries that were in deep trouble, including Venezuela, helping them to renegotiate debt for equity to help a lot of companies there get out of trouble during their dark times. That was in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. They got back into their dark times again later by their own trouble, but by then he was not responsible. I'm from the west coast of Canada, where the cedar tree is considered a holy tree, and so I was also very impressed to find out that he is a holder of the National Order of the Cedar. But it's not a West Coast cedar, it's a Lebanese cedar, which is his native country. After many years in international investment banking, he returned and now is serving his country, but also president of the World Association of PPP Units and Professionals out of Switzerland. So,
thank you so much.
Mr. Hayek, please.
What a wonderful introduction. So, I'm going to read my prepared notes because remarks in order to stay within the time frame. We all, depending on our professions and our markets, have become used to certain types of financing for certain types of activities. And we fall in the trap of thinking that this is the only type of financing available to us. Perhaps it is a bank loan, or a letter of credit, or a factoring transaction, or a note or bond issue. These are all fine. But from time to time, we face a transaction that requires a somewhat different approach, or a particular situation where we need to ensure we have as low a cost of funds as possible. It might be for the purpose of completing a transaction, an acquisition, for competing in a tender, or to finance a major asset. One way of dealing with such situations is to resort to professional advice and come up with a very customized financing solution that may involve some measure of structured finance, the use of call and put options, hedging in a particular currency, commodity, or credit market, or the segmentation of the credit risk into various tranches that appeal to discrete sets of investors. This last approach is, of course, the one that Wall Street has perfected in the past few decades. Namely, it involves dividing the financing into tranches, each of which holding an appeal to a particular type of investor. In emerging markets, this concept is applied by the World Bank to the famous IFC A and B loans. For large projects with note issues, a senior series might even attract an investment grade rating if the credit is enhanced sufficiently enough through diversification and some non-sovereign risk elements, as in the case of securitizations of future foreign receivables. But putting structured finance aside, I would like to highlight two broad financing fields which have been growing extremely rapidly, but which most borrowers are only marginally familiar with or aware of. Borrowers or people in need of financing, so it can be equity. These are ESG investments and Islamic financing. For those of you who are not familiar with it, ESG stands for good environmental, social, and governance principles. Environmental principles have to do with the conservation of the natural world, climate change, air and water pollution, biodiversity, energy efficiency, etc. Social principles have to do with people and relationships, customer satisfaction, data protection and privacy, gender and diversity, community relations, human rights, etc. And good governance principles refer to the standards for running a company or a public administration. Board composition, executive compensation, political contributions, bribery and corruption, etc. But ESG is not to be confused with socially responsible investing, or SRI, like simply avoiding investments in or financing of polluting industries. ESG is not about excluding companies and projects that may cause harm to society or to the environment. It is about investing in companies and projects where the E, S, and G factors position the company to be successful and make a positive impact. One of the main reasons for investors to pursue an ESG-based strategy, in fact, is to identify those investments with the highest alpha possible, thus differentiating them from companies that are more prone to systemic market risk or beta. So to illustrate ESG investing and borrowing from case studies highlighted in a CPA Institute compendium, on the environmental front, take Wabao investment in an agrochemical company whose environmentally friendly pesticide stood to give it an advantage over competition once China tightened its environmental laws. Or SBI funds investments in Ganesha Ecosphere, which recycles PET plastics, a major challenge increasingly facing urban communities. On the social front, take NN's investment in an aluminum company that figured it can substantially reduce costs by improving its employee health and safety record. Or Alliance Bernstein investment in India's Apollo hospitals because their hub and spoke approach expanded their company's serviceable market to include underserved rural communities. Finally, on the governance front, take Manulife's investment in a North American software company that changed its management's compensation structure to put more emphasis on return on invested capital instead of on maximizing operating income. Or Momentum's investment in a South African IT company that improved its performance for shareholders by decreasing the influence of executive management board members. Certain funds and investors are moving to invest only in instruments that meet minimum ESG standards. This class has been growing exponentially, and it is estimated that the ESG dedicated funds are now in excess of $40 trillion. This is a huge pool into which to tap if you are not tapping into it yet. There are a number of reasons for this growth. First, it should be noted that there is currently underway an intergenerational wealth transfer from baby boomers to their children of some $30 trillion, and that more than 80% of millennials are interested in sustainable investing in general, and 38% are highly interested in ESG factors. That's more than 4 times the level of interest among baby boomers. Second, long-term investors like insurance companies, pension funds, and sovereign wealth funds are increasingly interested in looking out for long-term success, i.e., sustainable success. Third, there is a growing institutional support for ESG financing. 49 stock exchanges have committed to publish ESG disclosure guidelines. 370 large asset managers have signed up to the UN Principles for Sustainable Investments. Amundi, Europe's largest asset manager, for example, has pledged to screen for ESG 100% of its investments by 2021. The European Investment Bank has decided to stop financing fuel-burning power plants, and BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager with more than $7 trillion under management, of which $1.8 trillion are under its direct management, has done the same. Fourth, there are now organizations actively involved in indexing and rating investments for ESG compliance. They include the likes of Fitch, Bloomberg, MSCI, FTSE, and Reuters, to name but a few. And fifth, 97 of the world's largest financial institutions have now adopted the Equator Principles, which parallel ESG. As you can see, the trend for ESG is becoming strongly entrenched and will be more so in the future. So if you haven't thought about how ESG can differentiate your company or project, now is the time to do so. You may be able to access large pools of funds, especially FDI funds, until now unavailable to you, and you may be able to obtain better financing conditions. The other financing resource which is not being fully utilized by borrowers is Islamic financing. I don't have much time here to go into it to the extent it deserves, but I will say a few words about it. The Islamic finance industry has expanded rapidly over the past decade, growing at 10 to 12% annually. Today, Sharia-compliant financial assets are estimated at roughly $2 trillion, covering bank and non-bank financial institutions, capital markets, money markets, and insurance. Most Islamic financing takes place in the Muslim countries of the Gulf and South Asia, but there has also been a surge of interest in Islamic finance from non-Muslim countries such as the UK, Luxembourg, South Africa, Hong Kong, and beyond. Like ESG financing, Turkey, by the way, is doing great in that regard as well, growing rapidly. Somebody was telling me, I was talking to Al Baraka, they were saying they've grown 39% past year, which is amazing. Like ESG financing, Islamic financing has a certain set of social and economic principles that an investment must meet. Chief among them, from a financial perspective, is the avoidance of interest charges or payment. There are two main types of transactions: profit and loss sharing partnership transactions, which can be compared with equity investments, and transactions with a predictable or fixed return structure. Basic instruments include insurance, takaful, cost plus financing, called murabaha, profit sharing, mudaraba, leasing, ijara, partnerships, musharaka, forward and deferred sales, bay' al-salam wal bay' al-mu'ajjal, and bond issuance, or sukuk. Global sukuk issuances in 2018 rose by 5.5% to $123 billion. The value of the sukuks currently outstanding is just shy of $500 billion. Key drivers of the market now include the entry of new jurisdictions and issuers, the issuance of Basel III compliant Tier 1 and Tier 2 capital sukuks, longer tenure sukuks, including perpetual sukuk issuance by financial institutions, infrastructure sukuks, and an increasing number of retail sukuk issuances. If you consider that of the 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, it is estimated that only 14% use banks, you can see the huge potential there is for the continued growth of Islamic financing. Like ESG financing, Islamic financing comes with certain ethical and behavioral conditions attached. But if your business or project falls within the required norms, or is capable of being tweaked to fall within those norms, then it would be a pity to miss out on what might be better financing packages for you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me.